Hey, I'm Daniel Prin, and I'm a staff writer here at The Movie Buff. I'm just jumping in here to introduce an interview conducted by our own Arpit Nayak for the documentary Trapped, Cash Bail in America. This was Arpit's first video interview for The Movie Buff show, where he was able to speak with the film's writer and producer, Chris L. Jenkins. Chris's film is a documentary about the problematic bail bond system in America, where many people who are in local state prisons are there because they can't afford to post bail. It sheds light on what can be changed in the system, shown through subjects affected by bail bonds. The film is currently available to watch on YouTube, and there will be a link to watch the documentary right down below. Here's Arpit to introduce his interview.
So, Chris, before we start the interview, I'm I staff writer with the Movie Buff, and I'll be conducting your interview today. Hope to get to know you better and also get to know about your documentary. And before we start the interview, I like to say that I loved your documentary. I believe it was a great subject. So, uh, just to start, would you like to introduce yourself to our site?
Sure. My name is Chris Jenkins. I'm a filmmaker and journalist and writer and producer of Trapped, Cash Bail in America.
Sure. So, Chris, basically, we like to know your story that how, because as per our research, and as you mentioned, that you are a journalist yourself, and then you have came into the filmmaking. So, what inspired you to become a filmmaker? We like to know about your journey.
Sure. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. So I grew up in New York City in the 1970s and 80s. And I grew up at a time in New York when there's a lot of inequality. Some of the conversation around inequality that we're having today between the rich and the poor was very evident in New York City in the 1970s and 80s. And I grew up in Harlem, which is a historic Black neighborhood, 139th Street and 7th Avenue. And, I just saw a lot of, like I mentioned, inequality and just social unease and unrest in my community and my neighborhood. And that really sort of opened my eyes to just the various different kinds of ways that states, counties, cities sometimes don't provide the kinds of supports for its citizens, particularly Black folks in America. And that really sort of opened my eyes, I think, to the kinds of things that I wanted to do with my life, which was to tell stories. For a long time in the Bronx in the 1990s, I was a social worker. So I worked with foster kids. And then I worked at the Washington Post. And filmmaking to me is a way of telling other people's stories, very much like I did when I was a reporter and editor as a journalist. But also it melds my interest in listening to people, what you do as a social worker, and also really being concerned about people's well-being and trying to advocate for them, which is what I bring to my filmmaking as well. So, my filmmaking career is really a culmination of not only me as a journalist, learning how to tell stories, but also being an advocate and activist for people who don't have their own voice. And it sounds cliche, but essentially to be a voice for the voiceless, which is what I think many Black filmmakers try to do when they approach their art.
That's great. So, I believe that based on what you said, that the neighborhood that you have lived in and the childhood you had that inspired you a lot to choose the subjects, because based on my research, the subjects of the documentaries which you have made till now, it's based on the social issues mostly. So is that one of the reason why you have made such subjects?
Absolutely. Just before we made the Trapped Cash Bail in America documentary, my director partner and I also did a film on Rikers Island, about Rikers Island, which is a jail in New York City, which is one of the most infamous jails in the country. And that really actually got us started on this issue around criminal justice and really working with and talking to and listening to the stories of people on the front end of the criminal justice system. A lot of conversation right now is about trying to bring some equity to people who have been in prison, who have been convicted of crimes already. So sentencing reform. improving the conditions of people in prison. One thing that I think we thought, at least when we did our Rikers film, is that there wasn't enough conversation around people who are on the front end of the criminal justice system, people who have been arrested but not convicted. And so the Cash Bell film and the Rikers film really sparked our interest largely because we saw a void in the understanding around people who have been arrested but not yet convicted. And so in Rikers, the jail in New York, 75% of the people at Rikers Island have not been convicted of a crime. And they effectively are being punished because of the conditions at Rikers Island. And so these are people who are waiting for trial. These are people who are very often there for a year, maybe 2 years, fighting their case. And, our justice system, does guarantee that you are innocent before proven guilty. The reason why we called our Rikers film Rikers Innocence Lost is because even though you were effectively innocent when you were in Rikers Island, you were treated as if you were guilty because of the conditions. And so, like you mentioned, we have an interest in these social justice films largely because of the conditions that I saw growing up, not only as a social worker, but also growing up in New York City.
Got it. So, Chris, one thing which I wanted to ask you is while I was watching your documentary, it's a brutal subject, it's quite eye-opening for the system as well. So, I want to know that is there any difficulty that you had, while you were researching the subject, and how tough it was for you to, compile the entire subject and present in a documentary?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So, documentaries about criminal justice, particularly when you're trying to tell the stories of people who are inside a jail or inside a prison, are remarkably difficult because of access. States and counties, generally speaking, don't want cameras inside their facilities. And what made making this film extra difficult was when you're arrested and you are, sent to jail, very often you're cut off from a lot of different people. You don't have family members who know how to get in touch with you. Maybe you have an attorney, but if you're poor, you probably have a public defender. That public defender has 200 cases very often, so you're not getting a lot of personalized attention. And so trying to find those people in jail was really, really difficult. The way in which we did it was by trying to go to those attorneys, those public defenders, and ask them, hey, do you have any clients that fit the bill of someone who's been jailed for a long time on a nonviolent charge, but they're in jail only because they can't pay their bail? And that took a long time because we were doing a national search. We were looking for people who would be in various different parts of the country. I'm in Washington, D.C., and so I had to talk to literally dozens of attorneys around the country over the course of 5 or 6 months to ask them to look for people on their cases, on their caseloads, but also be willing to connect with me and work with me because they're very busy, right? So the last thing that they really want to do is talk to a filmmaker when they've got these 150 or 200 cases to go to court with every week, right? So that's a tall ask to ask someone to add more work to their lives to deal with the caseworker and look through their cases and find someone who might first want to talk to us and then actually get us in touch with that person. And so it took about 7 months actually to find our lead character, Brianna Noah, who turned out to be a woman, a 24-year-old woman who was in jail in a small county outside of Kansas City. And it was really like catching lightning in a bottle because I was introduced to her lawyer, Shannon Peterson, who's an incredible public defender. And he understood immediately what I was doing, identified Brianna immediately. And so I talked to him like on a Tuesday, and I got on it for the first time, and I got on a plane on the next day, Wednesday, and just flew out to Kansas City to talk to him. I hadn't even talked to Brianna yet. I had no idea whether she was going to say yes, but you had to take a risk to figure out whether this was a case that might turn into the lead character. And so that's the kind of search, the sort of needle in the haystack, digging deeply into your Rolodex or your address book, calling every single source that you know to figure out who might be able to lead you to somebody who can tell their story while they're still in jail. When we talked to Brianna, she was still in jail. And so we never got a camera into the jail, but we did talk to her on the phone through Shannon. And the only person that we could talk was through her lawyer. So it was a very involved process, and it took a long time. And there was a time at various points during the journey, I didn't actually think that we were going to find anybody because it was that taxing, that frustrating. But that's what it takes to find the right person to tell your story.
Chris, do you believe that though we live in a society where people has been very vocal these days, do you believe it's still people do shy away to talk about the system? Do you believe that?
Do I believe about what?
Like let's say you come to me and you are asking me these questions against the system, about the justice system. So do you believe that people are still shying away to raise their voice, though we live in this vocal world?
It's interesting. I actually found a lot of people during this search who were interested in telling their story. We just couldn't quite get the timing right. I went down to Louisiana, to a small town called Leesville in Western Louisiana, and I talked to a couple of people in jail without a camera. I just went in there and I went with their attorneys, and they were interested in telling their story. We just couldn't quite get the timing right. They had been released by the time that we were able to get our cameras down there. Another situation, the attorney backed out and said that he didn't think it was a good idea for his attorney to talk to us about his case. And so I actually, when I was able to talk to someone about what I was doing as a filmmaker to try to tell their story, I actually got a lot of yeses. It was just a matter of finding them, which was the hard part. And so I find that a lot of people who are in situations like that voices have been muted for months, for days, sometimes a year. And they want someone to listen to what's happened to them. They want people to know that their situation was grossly unfair, unjust, and in many cases unconstitutional. So the question, the problem I had was less about finding people who would say yes. It was actually trying to find the people to actually fit the bill of what we were looking for. Once we got to the table, most people were really interested. They were actually honored and very surprised that someone wanted to hear them and hear about their story in a situation, about the situations they were in.
Chris, how tough it is to not to give your personal thought on your documentary, and still be what I mean to ask you that how tough it is not to be biased towards the subject and do not involve your own thoughts on it. Is it tough for you as a writer to not involve your own thoughts on your documentary?
Mm-hmm. How hard it was not to be biased?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. So I'm a filmmaker with a point of view. And it was incredibly important to me, though, to see both sides of the issue. There is very little question in my mind that the criminal justice system, as it relates to cash bail, is grossly unfair and unjust. I think that we make the case that whether you are conservative or liberal, progressive or conservative, you have to see that, yes, people get themselves into situations that we would consider unsavory sometimes, but that the way we are addressing our issues of criminal justice are really based on our monetary and economic points of view, that it is weighted towards people who have money. Now, what we try to do with the film is find people who clearly had cases that represented the unfairness and the unconstitutionality of the cash bail system. From our point of view, and I think our point of view was strongly backed by evidence and by the facts. But I did want to hear from the other side. So our film, allows for representatives from the bail bond industry who are fighting very, very hard to keep criminal justice reform from advancing, to have their say, to make their points that they feel as if the system generally as it is working fine, and that their economic, the way in which they are able to succeed in their effort to push back is based on their economic interests. Is the point I'm trying to make, is that they are motivated less by justice, from my point of view, and more by their economic interest. Now, they have actually, if you watch the film, the gentleman that I talked to, Jeff Clayton, admits that. He admits that he is the representative of an economic system, economic industry. So I think it was important for me, though, to give Jeff and the bail bond industry an opportunity to have their point of view. When it comes to the people that we chose, and not to be biased, we did a lot of research on people's backgrounds. We got the sense that the people that we decided to interview had clear, very sharp stories that were clearly not people who were, had done violent crimes, who had done things that we felt were unsavory to the point of the film. And so my concern about bias has to do with making sure that I give two sides to the issue, and allowing for folks who don't agree with our point of view to have their say, so that the audience itself can weigh the two sides of the issue and make its own judgment about the issues that we're bringing forth, and the 360 degrees of the opportunity to see everything that we were trying to bring forth to film.
Got it. So, Chris, I'm pretty sure that it is never easy for anyone, not you, but anyone, to raise their voices against straight line with the system. And I'm very sure you must have faced any challenges, while you're making the film or even after the release. Would you like to share any story of such?
I mean, I think the main challenges making the film was things in the criminal justice system are always changing, and so one of the concerns that we had was making sure that, when you make a documentary, we started this in April of 2018, so 3 years ago, and because I said it took 7 months to find someone, we wanted to make sure that the issues were contemporary, right? That things didn't change on the ground that made our film seem old. And so things were always changing on the ground that shifted the way in which we had to tell the story. For example, California, which we profile in chapter 3, they eliminated cash bail in August of 2018. So we were already starting to do some filming in California, and then they eliminated cash bail. But as it turns out, the bail bond industry pushed back and tried to stop the law that eliminated cash bail. And that made actually for an interesting part of the film, because events on the ground were changing as we were filming, which is always a filmmaker's dream. But at the same time, you don't want it to completely undermine the point of what you're doing, right? You don't want your film to seem old. And so in a lot of states around the country, we're dealing with the bail system as we were filming. And so trying to keep up with the changing elements and the changing issues on the ground was one of the challenges we had to face as well. And trying to make sure that our film didn't seem old by the time it came up by 2021 was a key issue that we had to really pay attention to. And so for all the filmmakers out there, very often changing events on the ground can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Sometimes these events undermine your entire point. Other times it makes your film actually more interesting. And so, we were about to actually publish the film last year before the Black Lives Matter um, explosion and Freedom Summer from last year. But we decided to not publish, not release it, go back into the film and actually update it a little bit, which actually made the film better by having things from last summer, which made the film feel even more fresh than it already was.
Got it. So, Chris, we live in this very vocal world, and it's provoking in its own way. So, how tough it is for a filmmaker like you, whose subjects are such that makes social and economic effects on people's minds. So, how tough it is for people like you, because social media this day is like a dual sword. It can bless you as well, and it can trash you as well. So, how tough is the impact of you on you? I mean to say.
The impact of the film
Impact
on
of the
me,
film or the subject that you choose as a filmmaker, because it's
on the
mostly
subject.
yes, yes.
I think that's a really good question. I think there are two ways of thinking about the impact of a film on a subject. And, we're living in a world where, people, the audience can chime in and respond in ways that are positive and negative because of, blogs and the ability to write comments into a section. I dealt with a lot with this when I was a reporter at the Post, which because a lot of my stories had to do with writing about people who were in tough situations, who were poor, who were on the margins. Every single time, I'm going to answer your question in a number of different ways. Number one, every single time I talk to a subject, I try to warn them that even if they are really eager to tell their story, a lot of people in the world are not going to be sympathetic to their tale, no matter how truthful, how tragic it is. And that's something that people sometimes are caught off guard about when people who watch their film have very little empathy, very little sympathy for what they're going through, and want to be vocal about it. So on the negative side, I think very often people who bare their souls with and people who have been through what they've been through in the criminal justice system, when they bare their souls, it can be tough to hear the very hard-edged, unsympathetic views from people in the public. And so we didn't really deal with that with this film, but I do think that that's something that as filmmakers we have to be very careful about, is making sure that our subjects are very aware of the kind of heat or criticism they may get because of the decisions they have made. Generally speaking, in this film, however, I think our three principal characters really, I think, feel as if, and I've talked with them, felt that they benefited, at least emotionally, from being able to bear their story to the world, to have their voices heard. I think, one of the things that William, the 40 or so year old gentleman who we start the film with, who's in the protests at the beginning of the film, one of the first things he says about being in jail is that his voice was never heard. That was one of the most difficult things about being in prison, being in jail, was that his voice was never heard, and that being a part of the film, talking about his experience, allowed his voice to be heard, and that was incredibly important to him. As for Brianna, I think that she, when I was emailing her back and forth a few months ago, I think she saw the film as an opportunity not only to have her voice heard, but also to see that her story really mattered, that her humanity mattered. And as from everything that I've been able to tell, she's doing really well now. She's out of prison. She is raising her two boys. She's moving on with her life. But that the film, she felt, I think, helped her not only get a sense about who she was as a person, but also I think she felt validated as a person through the film. The activists that we profile, I think, saw the film being helpful to their cause. I think that there was fundraising help that was available to them because of the film. I think it also bolstered the sense that that people now were supporting their work in even a broader fashion. I think that's always an important part of doing these kinds of films, because it does bring people who are doing things in the depths of the shadows into the light in a way that helps their cause move further down the road.
Got it. Chris, your documentary has received an excellent response on YouTube. I believe it has more than 2 million views, and it also has won the award. So what are your thoughts on this success?
What I think about this, yes. So, like my previous answer about, bringing light to people whose voices, whose activism, whose work may not have previously been known. We're just ecstatic that so many people now know, number one, about the issue, know about these people, these folks' stories as representatives of people, hundreds of thousands of people. This happens every day too, and bringing light to the folks who are trying to do the work on the ground. One of the things that I think Mary, who works in Atlanta, Alec, who works here in DC, Robin, who works in Los Angeles, I think what they would all say is that these kinds of issues only move forward when the general public begins to be outraged. And when nearly 3 million people can at least have access to these stories, it brings more recognition about the unfairness, the unconstitutionality, and the injustice around this issue that can only push these issues forward. So much about cash bail in particular is a little confusing, actually. It's not a particularly easy issue to sort of get your mind around because of the way in which we think about bail in our society. What I've always said is that most people know about bail from watching Law and Order. They think they know that when someone, gets a $500,000 bail, for example, that this person is somehow guilty already. That I don't think there has not been a lot of recognition that people who are in jail, generally speaking, have not been convicted of a crime. And in the feedback that I got from folks who watched the film, what most of them, whether they agreed with some of our points or not, said they finally understood, something clicked for them around what actually the cash bail system was, because their knowledge was actually not well informed. And so, to have nearly 3 million people who potentially now have a better understanding of exactly what this system is, how it actually is so disproportionately impacting the poor, that's actually incredibly important to us, that it's an educational tool. People can feel how they want to about the decisions that people make, or about the ways in which we have tilted the system either way for rich or for poor. But I think it's just important for people to understand. And I think what our film effectively does is to give a clear understanding of the cash bail system in a way that people can now go out and make all their own informed decisions for themselves.
Chris, do you believe that your documentary is as important for the global audience as well, not only the Americans?
Oh, international.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think it's funny. I mean, one of the things that shocked people in the film is that the United States and the Philippines are the only two countries that has a commercial bail system in the world, right? And I think there's a lot of recognition now around the world that America's criminal justice system is singular in its incredible injustice to how it treats people of color and poor people. And I think that this film helps reaffirm, I think, the view around the world that there is something deathly wrong about the way in which criminal justice is handled in this country. And so, I've never lived outside the country, so I don't have a clear sense about how other folks from around the country think about the United States on a daily basis. But I know some of the feedback that we got from people around the world was that this is just another example of what we kind of already know about how social justice and social policy works in America, and that there's something deathly wrong about the home of the free, land of the brave, or land of the brave and home of the free, whichever way you want to say, that there is something deathly wrong about how social policy works in this country. And so for anyone, I know that the United States does suck up a lot of air around international conversation, around the world. And so if we can somehow contribute to that conversation about ensuring that people around the world know exactly what's going on in this country, and that there are myths in this country that everyone should be aware of, all 6 billion people around the planet, should be aware of. I think that our film can help contribute to that understanding.
Got it. So, Chris, again, when we were talking about, I got to know that why you have chosen such subjects till now. So, as a filmmaker, would you like to just stick towards the social subjects, or as a storyteller, you like to, see other part of stories as well? Are you looking forward to the other stories as well?
Yeah, I mean, these are not. So the criminal justice, social justice issues that I've made films about over the last 5 years or so have been the cornerstone of the early part of my filmmaking career. But it's not the only things that I strive to filmmake around. I am very, very interested in weighty subjects and in American identity, the plight of people of color, history. All those things are really important to me, and I think those are the cornerstone of who I am as a person. But it won't always be in this form and fashion in which I talk about those issues. So whether it's a scripted project, I probably will always have a hand or an interest in some of these social justice issues. As a documentary filmmaker, I probably will, but it won't always be in this way. Although I can say, though, I probably won't be doing any comedies. I probably won't be doing horror movies. I probably won't be doing any period dramas from the 19th century. Most of my work will likely stay in America, likely stay in the 20th century, likely stay in the realm of people of color, and trying to give a sense about equity and fairness in this country. So to answer your question, I'm sort of taking you around the world and coming back to your question. Actually, most of my stories are going to be about social justice, about criminal justice. Most likely, they won't always be documentaries, though.
Yeah. So, Chris, I have two questions for you. Maybe that's not straight away related to the film, but that's more related to you. What are the people of the history that you love, and which are the filmmakers that you love?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
What are the filmmakers and what are the people from back in the history that you love the most?
Oh, love the most.
What is the reason behind it?
Yeah. So as you get older, your ideas change a bit here or there about who you admire. I mean, from history, this sounds cliche, but the more and more I learn and read about Martin Luther King, the more I admire him, not for the things that are advertised in America today, not for the content of your character speech, not for I have a dream speech, but really for his changing views in the later part of his life. Martin, in the early part of his career when he was 26 and leading the bus boycotts in the mid 1950s, I think really believed in the potential for American equality. By the time 1968 came around and he was on the brink of being assassinated, I think he understood the depths of American rot, and the deep contradictions in the society that he knew would not be overcome in his lifetime. I think he evolved into understanding that even his early pronouncements of equality were going, and that America's hearts could be changed around race, were not going to be as easy as he thought, and that there were deeper problems in society that even he couldn't get to. But he kept going. He became much more radical as he, as he got older. A lot of folks who quote Martin Luther King and say, well, he wouldn't have done this and he wouldn't have done that. They're only looking at him from 1956 to 1963. They're not looking at him from 1963 to 1968. And I think his, deep understanding of the American contradictions and American hypocrisy and his evolution and his ability to be able to say that when he started to, really come out against the war, Vietnam War, when he began to really try to put together a multiracial, a multi-ethnic movement with the Poor People's Campaign that he was organizing before he died. He was always ready to switch and change and evolve his tactics. And, that sometimes is overlooked, I think, about his life, about how clearly he understood the problems of America and how he always tried to change the way in which he did it, even when he had to go back on some of the things I think he believed in the early part of his career. So, I mean, I know it sounds cliche to say talk about Martin Luther King, but as I've gotten older, I'm way older than he was when he died. I mean, he died when he was 39. I'm 50 years old. I'm astounded by the journey that he went in 13 short years, which is sometimes overlooked. Today I'm just really, really proud of some of the young filmmakers, and I really strive to be a part of this community of young filmmakers of color, or not so young, my age, like Ava DuVernay, Ryan Coogler, Barry Jenkins, all these filmmakers who, are not only making incredibly, incredibly important work, but also bringing young filmmakers behind them, who are sharing in their success, or sharing their success with young filmmakers to bring a new generation of filmmakers to the stage. When I grew up, it was just Spike Lee, and John Singleton a little bit, and they did the best they could to share. But I think this new group of filmmakers, the folks I just mentioned, and others, are doing incredible work, but also changing the industry. Changing the fundamentals in a way that makes it work for people not only like them, but also people who come after them, whether it's people of color, whether it's women, whether it's trans people. There's a greater recognition of hiring people in these production companies so that the next generation has a platform on which to spring up.
I believe Spike Lee is the legend. I think no one can compare him.
Right.
I think so. Spike Lee is the legend. And I think the kind of film he has made in the last 3-4 years are quite amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
I believe that. So is the Ryan Coogler. I think it was his first film, which I saw, was Fruitvale Station. The story was devastating in a way. I was pretty shocked at the ending at what happened. Then, I had to Google the entire issue and everything. It was quite eye-opening. I could not believe that it can happen to people in the United States. Those people
Very, very gifted.
in part of the world have a very different view of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. I mean, he's very, very gifted. And from my point of view, he is applying his talents in the way in which he should, which is centered and rooted in his life in Oakland, and trying always to find a different angle on things that we already know. So Fruitvale Station is about Oscar Grant, young man who was killed by the police, and trying to get into that young man's life 24 hours before he was killed. Black Panther, it was was trying to upend the way in which we think about the superhero story. That there's social justice can be embedded, Afrofuturism can be embedded into a Marvel comic book tale, released by Disney. The Rocky franchise can be turned around and looked at from Apollo Creed's son's perspective. I mean, I think it's brilliant. It's just another side to the American story that we rarely hear, and he's doing it in multiple ways. And by the way, that's a way, back to your question about the kind of stories I want to do. I mean, he's doing these sort of social justice, alternative ways of looking at America from a different perspective, in this case, a Black perspective, in three different mediums. The sports film Rocky, the comic book film, Black Panther, and a more traditional sort of social justice film around Oscar Grant's life. So that's a way in which people can address issues of equality through different kinds of medium, film or film criteria, criteria. So I think it's a really important lesson that he's showing the world.
Chris, you're making a great efforts, for the society by bringing such critical topics into the public eyes. If you could tell something to the young generation, about how they should be, doing something for our environment or the humankind like you, what do you like to say to them?
Well, I never think I should tell anybody how they should do or live their life, or that they need to do something that they feel is outside their experience. When I answer that question, I usually answer it this way. It's incredibly important, I think, to study history and to listen to the voices of people who are different from you, and who are struggling to make society more fair for themselves and for all people. Listen to why they are saying what they're saying, and research the facts around why they're saying what they're saying. There's a huge debate in this country right now about history, about facts, about how things happen, about why things are the way they are. And from my point of view, there is becoming on one side of the country a recognition that our history, the way in which it's been taught, our perspectives have been skewed in a Eurocentric fashion. And folks who don't agree with that kind of reckoning are trying to push back and say, you know what? No, we need to teach the history, in a way in which we've always taught it, from a Eurocentric perspective. That to say anything else besides that is to tell white students or white children that they are wrong or that they are bad. No one's saying that. Only thing that the conversation going on right now from progressives, I think, is a way of trying to expand our understanding about the way in which things actually happened, and that inequality is generally it's been socially constructed by society. And so the one thing I would really encourage young filmmakers, young storytellers, is to really, really do objective research about how this country and our present moment came to be. That will lead you to the kinds of stories that I tell from my point of view. If you're open and you are truly honest about the history of inequality in this country going back 400 years, starting with Native Americans, you understand some of the inequality and some of the injustice you see. That will lead you to, I think, a point of doing the kinds of work that so many filmmakers are doing right now. Because when you are confronted with the unequivocal objective truth, you'll see that the things that people are saying on the streets, and Black Lives Matter, and the Me Too movement, all these things are based on true personal experience and historical precedent that can't be denied.
Got it. So Chris, I actually was about to ask you this question, and in a way you have answered that, because I believe that, right now in the world which we are living, not many people are very keen to, learn about the history. Many people want to just learn about the new things, but not about the history. So do you believe that if this situation will continue, it can, impact the world we live in?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that's the importance of media. I mean, the way in which history is taught, it's not made to be alive. And one of the things that I think the importance of people like Ava and Brian is that these stories are being told to a new generation in a way in which they can consume. And although I agree that that the younger generation may be less interested in history, that's because the way in which history has been taught it's been taught so poorly. I actually have, particularly from the young Black community, the young Black millennials, folks from age 20 to age 40. I think there is an resurgence in interest in history, actually. Podcasts and other kinds of media are really giving younger folks opportunities to learn about history in a different way. And so I think that, I'd push back on your point a little bit, just in that it feels like to me that, certainly certain communities of young people are more interested nowadays in learning about history the right way, and not learning about history from history books as told through media, through high school and college, right? That they're more interested in investigating and delving into history in a way that is on their terms, and are ratcheting up the conversation in a way that I think actually is positive. So I actually am somewhat encouraged by how this current generation is much more progressive, much more open-minded to the issues of understanding what has actually happened in this country over the last 400 years, and actually doing something about it.
As per you, what are the steps that the individuals, the society, or the administration can take for the betterment of the system?
Oh, I don't think we have another 2 hours to talk. So, it starts in your own community. It really does. And that sounds a little cliche too, but depending upon where you are in life, it starts with not only looking around and looking at your own community and understanding some of the inequality and things that go on in your community, and understanding how those things came to be. But it's also, like I said earlier, it's really doing the work to understand history, that we are in this current movement because of societal decisions made generally by governments that were not interested in the well-being of all people. The 1619 Project, started by the New York Times and Nicole Hannah-Jones, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and his work over the last 5 to 10 years, really unpacking the theft, as Ta-Nehisi would say, of so much industry and talent from the Black community over the last 150, 200 years, 300 years, actually, 400 years, if you really want to talk about it, is a place to understand and start. It only starts with you and understanding what really is happening, and not turning a blind eye to the things that people are talking about, which are based in reality. You can be rest assured that folks in the streets would rather not necessarily be in the streets advocating for all these issues. They'd rather be raising their families and going to school and going to work, but they're doing these things because there is a absolute need to bring some awareness to issues in this country. And so, every time I talk to people about, well, what should I do, and and why should I do it, it starts with you and your community and educating yourself, and not just putting your hands over your ears and not wanting to hear the truth about what people are saying. You can ask questions, you can be skeptical, but you cannot be cynical about it. You cannot fall prey to the easy, lazy distinctions about, oh, those people are just complaining, or those people just don't want to work, or those people just don't want to take accountability. It's all about being open and objective to the real history that's going on over the last 400 years, so that we are clearly dealing with the same facts, so we can then move forward as a country. Until then, we're going to be spinning our wheels. And so, again, when it comes to answering the question about what people should do is start in their own communities and educate themselves, and listen. And really be open-minded to the truths that are coming out of so many people's mouths.
So why do you think, Chris, that people need to see your documentary? How it is important for people to watch?
People need to watch our documentary because it really is a film that honestly tells and sheds a light on a true human rights calamity in our country. 500,000 people every day are in jail only because they can't pay their bail. These are people who have not been convicted of a crime. And if we are true to our beliefs that you're innocent until you're proven guilty, people who have been arrested largely on nonviolent misdemeanors, spending days, months, sometimes years in prison while they wait for their in jail, largely because they can't pay their bail amounts, is a fundamental undermining our basic values in America. It fundamentally violates our right to due process. It fundamentally undermines our sense of fairness about who should be able to, who can buy their freedom, and who has to stay in jail. And there's an opportunity, I think, our film is to give a clear and convincing opportunity to listen to people whose lives have been upended because of an unjust system. So, I think our film is fair. I think it tells the truth. I think you'll be better informed about our criminal justice system by watching our film.
Great. So, Chris, if you can, share your thoughts to the aspiring filmmaker, what will be your thoughts to the aspiring filmmakers?
Aspiring filmmaker?
Yes, if you could give them your thoughts, what it will be.
Yeah. So, if you have an idea for a film, first of all, believe in your idea. Collaborate with other people. There's going to be many times during the filmmaking process where you are going to wonder, why did I start this? Is this a good idea? Is this right? Why am I doing this? I need to stop. Those are normal thoughts to have about the idea that you might have during the filmmaking process. There's always going to be hurdles. Stick to your guns, stick to your idea, and believe in your vision. That's not to say that you have to be stubborn about your idea as it moves forward and evolves. You have to be open to evolution in your vision and your idea. But it's a dialectic between believing in your idea when the times get hard and also being open to evolution so that you can make the best film possible. It's a hard industry to be in. It's a hard thing to do to storytell. Whether you're writing a book or making a film, it's incredibly labor intensive, and it can really mess with your mind. But things get done because people believe in their visions, and they don't stop. And so don't stop. If you believe in what you're doing, it will be great. It will work. But you have to be patient. You have to be open. But you also have to be clear about your own vision. Let your vision be more clear.
Great. So, Chris, the last question of mine will be, what are your future projects look like? And are you currently working on something?
So right now I'm working on a 6-part docuseries called Mavericks. And it's a docuseries that looks at the unorthodox, surprising, and inspirational lives of American women. And so, the conceit of the series is that very often women are portrayed not in powerful positions, as being sort of secondary to the lives of men. This docuseries explores women essentially as sheroes, as women who do incredibly unorthodox things that you would think only men would do. And so it profiles those lives. So our first episode is about a woman, 32 years old, who is a rescue pilot for the Air Force. She's a commander. She saves people's lives across seas in really tough battle conditions, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, other places around the world, Northern Africa. And she has a tragic accident that essentially she lost her right leg. And so she has to come back and learn to fly these huge C-130 planes on a prosthetic leg. And so she's one of the first women that's ever been able to do this on the American Air Force. And so it's about that comeback that she has to becoming a Air Force commander who can fly these planes on one leg. And so that's an amazing, inspirational, and out-of-the-box story from our point of view. And all of our stories have that kind of hook that look at the incredible stories of these strong women who are doing these unorthodox things that only usually men do, but are doing them overcoming hurdles to get to their final destination.
So it was great chatting with you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Sure, Chris. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Hey, Daniel here, just popping in again to thank you so much for watching this conversation between our staff writer Arpit Nayak and writer and producer Chris L. Jenkins for his film, Trapped, Cash Bail in America. The film is now available to watch on YouTube, and we will be sure to put the link down below. Thanks as always for supporting The Movie Buff, where you can find more reviews, interviews, and podcasts.